Hello again. Samuel Andrews, Christianity and Anti-Christianity and Their Final Conflict, in his chapter Relation of the Church to the World, page 103. He's now talking about the bearing of the loss of the first love on the relation of the church to the world, and especially as to her place and work preparatory to the establishment of the kingdom of God. The wide and deep distinction which the Lord made between his church and the world, we have seen in his own teachings, but this distinction would continue till his return, when the prince of this world would be cast out and all nations be subject to the king from heaven. Till this time the church would be in the world, as he was, a pilgrim and stranger, looking upon her mission of preaching the gospel and educating her members as only preparatory to his return. But with the loss of the first love, which subordinated all things to his honor and prayed for his return, doubting thoughts arose in her heart. She ceased to feel herself an espoused virgin waiting for the coming of the bridegroom and the marriage, which alone could give her the right to sit with him on his throne. She would take the kingdom in her own name and before the time. That we may understand the full significance of this changed attitude of the church, let us consider the conception of the kingdom of God or of heaven and the modifications through which it passed. The main element in the conception of the kingdom of God on the earth is that of a perfectly righteous rule, embracing all the nations, under which rule all injustice, oppression, and strife will cease. The evils of poverty be known no more, and all men dwell in peace together as brethren. We have no reason to believe that the Oriental peoples, or later the Greeks and Romans, looked forward to any such universal kingdom of righteousness, either in the earlier or remoter future. They knew nothing of the social perfectibility of man, or of human brotherhood, and saw no goal divinely appointed toward which the race is tending. Perhaps there was, in Stoic philosophy, with its cycles of changes and periodic conflagrations, some conception of the unity of the race, but scarcely of any continuous progress. The Golden Age was at the beginning of a cycle, not at the end. It was said by Lucretius, the philosophic Roman poet, "All things by degrees must fall, worn out by age or doomed to certain death." It is among the Hebrews, a monotheistic people, and through Revelation that we find the origin of the conception of a kingdom of God. Let us note the elements that enter into it and its subsequent modifications. The Hebrew conception first. This conception had its basis, as its basis, a belief in one God, supreme, righteous, and directing all movements in nature and humanity towards a definite end. And that end, the establishment of his visible authority over all nations. Under his rule, all discord and strife would cease, and peace and prosperity everywhere prevail. All peoples would honor and worship him, and the world come to its golden age. Thus the Hebrews were made to look forward rather than backward. In the past, indeed, as declared in their sacred books, was Eden and innocence, but very early came the serpent and sin and death, and not till these were overcome could the kingdom of God come. Then there would be more than restitution of the old Edenic order. All would be made new. Two things are to be noted in this Hebrew conception: that the kingdom was not to be established by a gradual moral progress of the nations, but by God's supernatural actings, and that while it is his kingdom, and he is the supreme ruler, it is to be administered by one of the lineage of David, whom he would send. It would be universal. All nations would obey his king, and without end. This blessed messianic period was the great theme of Old Testament prophecy. The Messiah is central figure. This distinction, taken, as we shall later see, by the apostles between the messianic kingdom as redemptive and the eternal rule of the Messiah after redemption is completed, is not brought out in the old prophets. They speak of his dominion as everlasting, not discriminating its two successive phases, redemptive and post-redemptive, as is done by St. Paul, for instance, in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 24. And he has a footnote for that. He says the apostle does not deny in that Corinthians passage the eternal duration of the Son's rule when he speaks of his giving up the kingdom to the Father, but affirms that the mediatorial or redemptive form of it will come to an end, because its purpose will have been accomplished, all things having been brought into subjection under him, that is Messiah. Now he talks about the apostolic conception. This, though, in its main elements is the same as the Hebrew, but far higher, since the apostles saw in the supernatural person of the King a foreshadowing of the greatness and glory of his kingdom. As the incarnate Son of God, and having all power in heaven and earth, his kingdom, though on earth, could not be classed with earthly kingdoms. Its symbol was the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. And as the King was a man, raised from the dead, and made immortal, and so could be God's perfect ruler through all ages, so must all those who would be his helpers in the administration of his rule. His kings and priests must be made like unto him, and under such a heavenly government a perfect social order could be established, and all nations dwell in peace under his sway. The apostles always distinguished clearly between the Lord's present priestly work in heaven, beginning with his ascension, and his future kingly work on earth. He had gone to the Father to be made the great high priest, ever interceding in the most holy place. When this work of intercession should be finished, and the church his body gathered and perfected, then would he come forth to seat himself upon the throne of his glory, and begin his work as judge and king. Matthew 25:31, the sheep and the goats. He was indeed at his ascension invested with all authority, but his present exercise of it is providential and unseen. The world has not yet known or recognized him as the King. The sphere of his visible rule is now in the church itself, where his will is made known in the choice of its ministers and in its whole administration, and is supreme. Not till he returns and takes the kingdom is his rule over the nations made manifest, and all human rulers recognize him as the source of all their authority. Then he takes to himself his great power and reigns. Till that time, the church must be in the world as he was in it, its divine claims not recognized and exposed to enmity and reproach. Not till he enters upon his kingly office can the church reign with him. And then he has a note about this distinction. He says, the distinction taken by theologians between the kingdom of grace and the kingdom of glory is a just one, rightly understood. The first, this reign of grace, as it were, and he has the Latin phrase for that, and the second, the reign of glory. These refer to the two differing spheres and times of his rule, that in the church through his Spirit during his absence, and that over the nations when he returns in glory, and the church is glorified with him. The error of not a few, however, is in identifying the two, and thus making the kingdom of glory to be either the blessedness of the disembodied saints, or that later condition of things when he has given up the kingdom to the Father. I'll put in a link to two videos we did on Jesus' authority. By what do we recognize the authority of Jesus? And we did a tract on this. You can get it on onewonders.org. And we also did videos based on that tract. So I'll put the first of those two linked on your screen in Jesus' version of authority. How did he prove who he was to his disciples and even to the world later? See you next time.